In this video, we will be learning how to play better chess by studying a game played by Capablanca. This was an incredibly genius game. Capablanca ended up getting a 96% accuracy with a brilliant move, and there is so much that we can learn from watching this game. So Capablanca was playing with the black pieces, and we are playing against the king's pawn, pawn to e4. And the most beautiful thing about this game is that it looks so incredibly simple. This looks like anyone could have played this game, yet it was very brilliant. So pawn e4, pawn e5, very basic, knight to f3, knight to c6 to protect the pawn, which has just been attacked. And white here plays the Ruy Lopez opening with bishop to b5. Okay. Capablanca continues with knight to f6, and for those of you that don't know, it looks like white can win a pawn here by trading the bishop and then grabbing that pawn, which is actually false. This doesn't work because of the move queen to d4. The knight is under attack, the pawn is under attack. If the knight goes back, they lose the pawn with a check, and then we just continue from this position. So although it looks like this pawn is free, it is not free. All right? White castles, and Capablanca just continues with the most simple opening strategy that you could come up with. He plays bishop to e7 because we just want to castle on the next move. White plays rook e1, and even though this looks like it's just a generic move, we already have to watch out here as black, because if you castle, you are losing. Why? Well, this time, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes works. White wins a pawn. After the move queen to d4, this pawn is protected by the rook. And this shows how important it is when you are playing chess to not get tunnel vision. Because if you get tunnel vision and you just start thinking about your own move, you don't take into account why your opponent played this move, you will just be down material very early. So always ask yourself the question, why did my opponent play this? Try to figure it out. And then Capablanca realized here that he has to play pawn to d6 to protect the e5 pawn. We cannot let that pawn hang forever. We need to protect it. White is playing quite well in this game, quite aggressive, taking the initiative. Pawn to d4, a second pawn in the center, and this pawn could also come forward and attack the knight. Let's say we castle right here. Pawn to d5 would be possible, which is also not really something that we want. We never really want the opponent to have any pawns on our side of the board that are well supported. That's just annoying, and those pawns take away so many useful squares from our pieces. So you never want this to happen, which is why Capablanca just took the pawn, and white recaptures, of course, with the knight and not with the queen, because there could be tactics in the future since it's already attacked. Not immediately though, not immediately, because the knight is pinned, but you never really want to put yourself in unnecessary danger anyways. Right here again, white would really like, black would really like to castle. Capablanca wants to castle, but we cannot go tunnel vision. We always have to look at what was the last move the opponent played. Well, they are attacking this knight twice, and if we don't defend it, we are going to lose something. So we cannot just castle, otherwise we run into take, or even bishop first and then knight second. Both of those work. And white is just up material. So how can we protect this knight? Very simple. There's pretty much only one move. Bishop to d7. Protecting the knight so that we are okay. White develops and black can finally castle. The opening was definitely not the most important part here, but it is good to study this together so that we can learn again to avoid tunnel vision in our games. To always look for what the opponent is doing first before we try to come up with any moves for ourselves. All right, and from here we are going to see an incredibly simple yet incredibly effective strategy from Capablanca that you can also try to use in your own games. So what Capablanca is going to do here is almost nothing. We are just going to simply improve our pieces, and we are waiting for white to give us any opportunity, and the opportunity in this game will be quite amazing. So Capablanca just continues with a simple optimization move. Rook to e8, putting the rook here on the open file. At least it's open on our end since we don't have a pawn there. White is maneuvering a little bit with the knight, getting that knight to the g3 square. All of that is fine. And Capablanca just thinks again, how can I improve my pieces? We don't want to start pushing pawns right here. We don't know yet what the middle game is going to look like. We just want to improve pieces. And that's why Capablanca plays the move knight to e5. This improves the knight, improving meaning putting it on a better square. This is a better square. The knight is attacking more important squares into the opponent's position. And we are also offering white a trade of bishops, which white accepts, but by accepting, they help us to develop the queen, and then we just got a new square for the rook in the future as well. So incredibly simple strategy. We just want to optimize pieces. We want to wait for the opponent to start making mistakes. And white here plays pawn to f4. White is basically trying to kick away that very well placed knight on e5, force us to move it, which we have to move it. We don't really have a choice. So Capablanca moves it back to g6. I think a lot of beginner players would think, oh yes, I can push again and I can attack the knight again. But that would be a terrible move because you are basically just giving them back that e5 square and you didn't achieve anything as white. So that's not the strategy you want to go for. Instead, white try to also optimize pieces. They play the move knight to f5. Looks incredibly logical. The knight is being improved. It's on a better square. It's protected by a pawn. And it's also attacking a bishop. And in general, if you can get a bishop in exchange for a knight, that is a good trade in general, especially here, since we have quite an open position. Open meaning there are not that many pawns in the center. When your opponent is threatening something like this, if you can save your bishop, save your bishop. It's very simple. But this helps because if we give up that bishop, let's say we play any other random move, and we give up that bishop, we are going to be slightly worse here for this middle game because we have quite an open position, a tactical position potentially, where the opponent is the only one with a bishop. And that's not what we want to happen. So bishop goes back to f8. Really, I call these grandmaster moves, putting a piece back on the first rank just to save it or remaneuver it later. These are the grandmaster moves in my opinion. So definitely something to remember for your own games. Queen e3 by white, and Capablanca will just continue with the simplest strategy possible, piece optimization. We don't really want to start moving any of these pawns if it's not necessary. You have to learn to get better at chess. You need to just improve pieces and wait for the opponent to make mistakes. So rook to d8, all of our pieces are active. All right. White plays bishop to d2. Once you get to a point where you feel like all of your pieces have been optimized, they have been developed, which I think that's the case here. I mean, the rooks, the queen, the bishop, the knights, it's all incredibly well placed. Then it's usually the moment to try something with either your e pawn, d pawn, or c pawn. So e pawn, d pawn, or c pawn. We don't have an e pawn, so it's going to be d pawn or c pawn for us. Why these pawns? These are the only pawns that when you move them, it doesn't really create any troubles or weaknesses. Moving these pawns actually helps to open up diagonals, open up files for your pieces. And once everything is in place, that's really what we want. We want to open up the position. So both c6 and d5, both of these would be playable. c5, however, would be bad because we are just creating a backwards pawn here and the opponent can even potentially use that square to put a knight there. Capablanca chose to go with the move d5, which is the simplest of all moves because this really tries to open the position at a moment where we have incredibly well-placed pieces. And that is the strategy here. White plays a sensible move, not really helping black to open up. Instead playing pawn to e5 to attack the knight. And it's from this point forward that the game really gets brilliant. And there is even a brilliant move here. Because Capablanca is going to use an incredibly interesting strategy. So our knight is under attack. We could always move it. If we move it, we would probably be looking at this square, g4. But Capablanca said, why would I move this to g4 immediately? Why don't I play bishop c5 check? Incredibly good move. Don't mind chess.com saying it's an inaccuracy. Because this is a check. The king goes to the corner, and now we have knight to g4. And it's the same strategy, but it comes with way more threats. Because we are threatening to now do this devastating fork where we would win the king and the queen. We would attack the king and the queen, excuse me, and win the queen. If we go for it straight away, we don't really have that threat yet. That move doesn't work, and the king is still here. So incredibly well played. We are going to see here that sometimes the chess.com engine will actually be wrong. Like here, it's saying this is an inaccuracy while it's actually one of the best moves. It's even going to call the best moves mistakes sometimes. And that's just because this play by Capablanca was so incredibly deep that even the engine struggles to understand why it's so genius. But this is very basic to understand. This is a very good maneuver. And I mean, White needs to solve this. White needs to do something. And the only move that they actually only have one move to solve this. It's not rook here because we still check and they have to give us a rook. It's not bishop here because we have take, and yeah, whatever they do, we take with the knight. So yeah, how do they protect this square? There's only one move, which is knight to d1. Retreating with the knight, another grandmaster move, I would say, putting a piece back on the first rank to stop this from happening. And this is where the game gets a little bit crazy, because Capablanca realized here that black has an incredibly strong strategy that we can try to use. What we are going to try to do is we will try to create a passed pawn. Actually, multiple passed pawns, potentially. And that's, in general, a very good meta game strategy to play for. Capablanca played what is the top engine move, pawn to f6. So, yeah, chess.com is calling this a mistake. It's not a mistake. I will change this. It's a good move. It's the best move in this position. Pawn to f6. All right. And this is interesting. So we will have to look at this together a little bit, because this also comes with some complexities. So if white takes the pawn, we have rook, well, multiple lines, but rook to e1 with a check. Let's say bishop takes. That's probably the only thing they can do. And then we have knight takes f4. And there is too much pressure here on the white position. The queen is attacked. Queen has to move. The knight is hanging. The two knights and the bishop are already attacking the enemy king. It's too much pressure. White will lose here. White will just lose, especially that knight is lost. So that's a problem. White cannot really capture. White cannot really push, because we would just simply take that. So white doesn't really have that many good moves. And if white just plays any random move, we will also be winning after captures, which we are going to see something like this in the game. White actually played one of the best moves. Whenever the opponent has pieces on your side of the board, like this knight is on the white side of the board, it's attacking. It's best to try to get rid of those pieces as quickly as you possibly can, because the more pieces you allow to stay on your board, the worse it's going to get. So h3 is actually the best move here, which leads to knight f2 with a check. Of course, their knight is protecting this, and we can take that with the bishop, which also comes with an attack on the rook. So very normal, very logical. And white plays rook e2, attacking the bishop. And this is where the brilliant moves are starting to happen, and the rest of this game is just pure genius in my opinion. So they attack our bishop. So what most people would do is probably move back the bishop, which that's perfectly reasonable, but that won't get you a brilliant move. What move could we play here to get a brilliant move? Well, the move is pawn takes on e5. Pawn takes on e5, brilliant move. Well, why is this brilliant? It's brilliant because we sacrifice a bishop, which white takes. But afterwards, we play the move pawn to e4. And pawn to e4 attacks the queen and also disconnects the queen and the knight. So not only is the queen under attack, the knight is also hanging. So the piece that we just sacrificed, we are going to get it back. That's the first part of the strategy. Plus, they will also have to watch out for a move like pawn to e3, forking the bishop and the rook, maybe winning even more material, depending, of course, on where the white pieces go. White realizes that they are in trouble. They will be losing this knight. So they choose the best thing you can do in that position to make a desperado move. A desperado move is this. You realize you are losing your knight, so you want to lose it in a way that damages the opponent's position as much as possible, which here means doubling the pawns on the rook file, which is the worst file to have pawns, especially doubled pawns. So a good strategic sacrifice by white, who realized that their piece was lost anyways. White then plays queen d4. I think it's perfectly reasonable to play this because they want to keep an eye, of course, on this move. If they are careless and they go somewhere else, well, this is another tactic. Pawn to e3 with a fork. So this move makes a lot of sense, keeping an eye on that. So what Capablanca realized here is that he basically already has the winning endgame advantage. How can you learn this? How can you see this in your own game? Why is this a winning endgame advantage? Well, we have this. This is a passed pawn, meaning a pawn that can promote because there are no other pawns holding it back, no other pawns that can stop it. So this is a pawn that can promote. We also have a central pawn majority. What does that mean? It's a difficult word, which basically means we have more pawns in the center than the opponent. Yes, quite obviously, we have two. I would even say we have three. Because if we could play c5, and then something like d4 and e3 and all of the pawns work together, we will trade this for this, which means we will have two passed pawns, connected passed pawns. And connected passed pawns in the endgame, that's just game over for the opponent. So what is the quickest way for us to try to get an endgame in this position? While the endgame starts once the queens are traded. Queen to g7, offering a trade of queens. Imagine if white takes this endgame is completely lost, even though I'm sure it doesn't look that way to many of you, but this is completely lost for white because of the passed pawn and in the future, the connected passed pawns that we are going to have. So yes, we are offering them a trade of queens. We want the endgame. White grabs one of these pawns here on the queen side. These pawns don't matter. It's all about the central pawns. And Capablanca captures this pawn here on b2, which actually also doesn't really matter, but the move itself is good because it attacks the rook and it protects this pawn and it attacks this pawn at the same time. So a lot of benefits from one single move. White is starting to realize that there is trouble here. I mean, this passed pawn, potentially connected passed pawns, this is very hard to deal with. White also has to keep a permanent defender to stop us from playing pawn to e3, which would be a devastating fork. Whenever you have passed pawns or one passed pawn, the best moves will always be either pushing those pawns or preparing to push those pawns. Well, we cannot push straight away. We would simply be giving up a pawn, but we can push this one, which is preparing this nearly unstoppable threat of pawn to e3, forking both pieces. Incredibly difficult for basically impossible for white to deal with. White tries to counterattack. White plays pawn to f5, attacking the knight. And here I feel Capablanca played what I would almost call the second brilliant move, which is pawn to e3. I will even just, for Capablanca, make this a brilliant move. I feel like this is also brilliant because we are sacrificing a knight near our king to go for this fork with the pawn. And it's also, again, pushing the passed pawn. Whenever you are unsure what to do in these positions, there's always only one solution. That's the best. Push the passed pawn. That's what you need to remember from this video. Push the passed pawn. With a fork, okay, they move the rook. Our knight is still hanging. The best thing to do here is actually quite simple to find. It's always looking for the passed pawn. The fact that this knight is under attack doesn't even matter. Capablanca played knight f4, which is perfectly fine, but you don't have to be defensive like this. Pawn takes d2. Pawn takes d2. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes with a check. The king goes up to g7, and you are just completely winning as black because we have a pawn that will queen on the next move, and it's impossible for white to stop this. But this requires quite some calculation, quite some courage as well, because you might mess something up. Instead, Capablanca played a more simple approach, knight to f4, which, of course, is also an amazing move, because this rook is now trapped. But this shows my general rule. Advancing the passed pawn is always the superior plan, even if it looks impossible. Like here, it looks like we give up a rook. We still have to do it. Pushing the passed pawn is always the solution. Okay? White tries to put up some counterplay. None of this really works. Capablanca just says, please take my queen this time. I want to have an endgame because I have the winning endgame position. White again refuses to take it. Makes a lot of sense, and we got the exchange here. We got a rook in exchange for a knight. White gives a silly check, doesn't really matter, the king can move, and then white recaptures. Well, what do we want to happen in this position? We want to get an endgame. We want to trade the queens. Which move can we play to guarantee ourselves a queen trade in this position? Only one move, queen to a6. We again offer a queen trade, but this time they cannot really refuse, because if they refuse, well, they are losing the rook. So they cannot refuse. They have to either take or go back on the same diagonal, which is also a queen trade. So they actually choose to do this, which is the better approach. Moving the queen backwards, Capablanca gladly takes this. It's a queen exchange, and now we have the endgame. We have the passed pawn, but the passed pawn is blocked. The pawn that's supporting us is also blocked, but you have to remember what we talked about. We have the pawn majority. We have a 3 versus 1 situation here in the center. If only we could swap these two, the two blue ones, that would be perfect. Then we would have two connected passed pawns with the rooks behind it. So Capablanca just simply plays c5. White plays whatever move, and then here, a beautiful ending. Capablanca just plays c4, which of course that gives away the pawn, and white resigns. Why do they resign? Well, if they take, we have achieved what we realized 20 moves ago because of our pawn structure understanding, that this is winning. Pawn d3. Let's say the rook goes back, we get a fork. Let's say the rook goes sideways, we still go forward, we attack the bishop, we threaten to promote, game over. So a very good lesson here in pawn structure and passed pawns. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe.